The memory of that winter before Kiev burns in me like a coal that never quite goes dark. When I close my eyes, I can still see the city as it was the first time we crested that last low ridge and looked down upon it. In my youth, the wide grasslands of the steppe felt eternal, and cities were just distant islands of stone in a world of sky and wind. Our felt tents clustered like grazing sheep around the banners of our princes. Behind us, the plains rolled away until they kissed the horizon. At dawn, the steppe was a bowl of pale light and frost. We'd mount up while the stars still clung to the sky. Saddles creaked, horses snorted steaming breath, and the smell of leather and sweat wrapped around us like a cloak. I thought it would be like this forever. Herds coming and going, seasons turning in their steady circle. I was born to the horse in the days when our great Khan's sons still argued over their share of the earth. My father and his father before him had driven herds under the same high, open sky. We owned no walls, no carved stone, no gilded domes, but we had good maraes and straight bows, and for us that was wealth enough. Life followed a rhythm as predictable as the passage of herds. Mornings, the men rode out with the flocks or drilled with bow and lance. Evenings, we gathered around shared fires, mending tack and telling stories of raids survived. Once each season, we offered meat and fermented marae's milk at a cairn of stones on a low rise. There the elders would speak of battles our people had fought long before I was born. Rivers run red, towns burned to ash. On one of those stones, a grizzled warrior had scratched crude symbols. He said they spoke of a great city far to the west that had once defied our ancestors and then punished with fire. As a boy, I traced those rough cuts with my fingers, half listening as the old men spoke of walls taller than 10 men and churches with domes like upturned bowls of gold. Still, there were omens in the months before we rode against the Russ. The first was the silence of the wind. That autumn, the sky was usually filled with migrating birds, but as the cold deepened, the world felt strangely still. The few birds that appeared wheeled away toward the south, as if fleeing some invisible hunter. The second was the behavior of the horses. On some days they moved with a nervous, jerking energy. Our best maraes balked at streams they'd crossed 100 times. At night, they jerked their heads toward the west, ears pricked, snorting at nothing. My father muttered that the spirits of far lands were stirring. The third omen came on the night. Our Orju received Beta's summons. The air was cold and brittle. I stepped out from our tent into a camp that felt paused, as if the world were holding its breath. Inside, my younger brother polished his bow. "What news?" he asked, his eyes bright with the hunger of youth. I remember clapping his shoulder and saying, half in pride and half in unease, "We ride west. The princes have decided. There are rich cities there, they say. Kiev among them." Those words would haunt me for the rest of my life. I was on the edge of sleep when the riders came. The faint drumming of hooves thickened into the rhythm of messengers changing mounts. Our tent flap lifted. A herald's shadow bulked dark against the firelight. "Arm yourselves," he said. "At dawn we break camp. The Khan's will is to test the strength of the Rus city by the great river, Kiev." We had heard that name before, in snatches. Traders spoke of it as a place where many roads met, of streets paved with planks and bells that called the people to kneel. Outside, the camp stirred. Men checked bowstrings. Women packed what would travel with us. There was no panic. This was the life we knew. But under the familiar clatter was a tautness, a sense that this campaign would not be like the others. We rode when the eastern sky was only a pale bruise. The column stretched like a river of fur and iron. Other Tumans joined us, swelling our numbers until the steppe seemed covered in horses and men. Days blurred into weeks. We crossed frozen streams, threaded through bare forests. Sometimes distant villages burned ahead of us, black smoke pillars against a gray sky. At night, We lay on the cold ground wrapped in furs, staring up at unfamiliar stars. Stories were whispered around the fires. The Rus were proud, their lands rich, their churches filled with gold. Some said if Kiev fell, all the lands around would lie open. Others muttered that the city had endured many storms, that its stones drank blood and gave nothing back. The first sight of Kiev still lives in my memory like a brand. We had been riding through broken country, the sky the color of old bone. Then we came up over a crest, and there it was. The city lay in a hollow by a broad, frozen river. A ring of earthen ramparts and stone walls wrapped around it, studded with wooden towers. Inside, roofs clustered thickly. And above all, rising like islands, churches with domes that caught the little light and made it gleam like cold coins. We reined in, thousands of riders falling silent. To me, who had grown up where the horizon was broken only by clouds and tents, the sight of so much stone in one place was as strange and unsettling as staring at a storm-tossed sea. Our leaders did not pause long. We flowed down from the rise and began to encircle the city, a ring of hooves and iron tightening around their stone. The days of preparation were a slow, grinding pressure. We pitched our tents just beyond arrow reach. Our engineers set to work, cutting timber, building siege engines, great wooden frames on wheels, covered in hides, with slings that could hurl stones the size of a man's chest. The people of Kiev watched us from their walls, helmets glinting. Their bells tolled at odd hours, long, mournful notes that floated over the frost-bitten fields. Once, a small party of their leaders came out under a white cloth. They spoke with our envoys, then turned back. They had chosen to stand behind their walls. Nights were the worst. The city loomed in the darkness, a darker cluster against the dim sky. We could hear faint sounds from within, dogs barking, the murmur of many voices, the echo of their bell. It was as if we lay camped outside the shell of some great beast, listening to its heartbeat. One night, a blood-red halo formed around the moon. Another, a wolf came close to the camp, howling, its eyes catching the light as it stared toward the city, then toward us, before vanishing into the dark. I remember waking before dawn on the day the assault truly began. The air was sharp, brittle. No wind stirred the banners. "The day has come," my brother said quietly behind me, his hands steady, but his voice was not. I nodded, my own throat tight. "We will ride together," I told him. "Stay close." Those words would carve their own scars across my heart. The signals came as the first pale light appeared. Drums began to beat, slow at first, then faster, a rhythm that echoed in my chest. Horns called across the fields. The siege engines creaked forward. We mounted. The leather of the saddle felt colder than ever. The first stones flew when the sun's rim cleared the earth. The great arms of our engines swung, and the stones soared through the cold air. They struck the walls and towers with bone-deep booms. Wood splintered, stone cracked, and the ground trembled. The bombardment did not stop. The defenders answered, arrows rising from the walls in dark swarms. Their bells rang wildly now, no longer in solemnity, but in frantic, uneven clanging, like a man's heart racing. Ours blurred into a single long roar. Houses near the walls caught fire. Their smoke smeared the sky, mixing with the dust from the battered ramparts. Through brief glimpses, we could see people streaming through the streets like disturbed ants. We did not stop. The command was given to move closer. We pushed the rams forward under covers of hide, a mix of our own men and those from conquered lands. Arrows hailed down, thudding into leather, wood, and flesh with wet, dull sounds. Men fell, and others took their places. The rams swung, pounding the gates with heavy, rhythmic blows that echoed like a giant's heartbeat. I was with the horse archers, our job to harass the walls, pick off defenders, and draw their fire. We'd gallop close, loose our arrows, and wheel away, the cold air tearing at our eyes as the city loomed like a stone cliff. Then the sound changed. Amid the constant boom, there came a deeper, tearing crash. A tower near one of the gates sagged, its legs cut from under it. The next barrage made it crumble. A section of the wall slumped, stones tumbling in a great, grinding cascade. Dust burst outward in a thick, choking cloud. A harsh, exultant cheer went up from our lines. The breach had begun. Our commander's banners dipped and rose. Orders ran along the ranks like fire. Footmen surged toward the falling stones. Archers poured arrows into the gap, into the swirling dust where defenders desperately tried to form a shield of flesh where stone had failed. We were called in then, not to ride away, but to press closer, to widen the wound. We dismounted, leading our horses forward, bows in hand. The air near the breach was thick with dust that tasted of grit and old mortar. My lungs burned. Shouts in our tongue, and theirs tangled together. A knot of sound woven with the screams of the wounded. "Stay with me." I yelled to my brother over the din. He grinned, the skin around his eyes tight with dust and fear. "I will," he shouted back. We climbed over fallen stone, our boots slipping on rubble, stepping around bodies already gray with settling dust. Inside the gap, the defenders fought like cornered animals, axes rising and falling, spears jabbing, shields slamming. For a while, the battle was just a blur of close, ugly work. Arrows loosed at a dozen paces, blades flashing in cramped spaces. Men grappling, teeth bared. The city was no longer a distant island of stone, but a choking, crushing maze trying to swallow us all. I remember a Russ man, his beard matted with dust, eyes wild, lifting a long axe. My arrow was already knocked. I loosed without thinking. It took him in the throat. He staggered, mouth opening and closing as blood bubbled out, then sank to his knees, clawing at the shaft. He could have been any man. A fisherman, a craftsman, a father. In that moment, he was only a target. It was later that his face returned to me in the quiet hours, stripped of rage, looking only dot afraid. The defenders held and broke and formed again, like a wave against rocks. But finally, the weight of our numbers pushed them back. We spilled through the breach into the city proper, like water through a cracked dam. Kiev was no longer a distant story. It was under my boots. Narrow streets, lined with wooden houses and tall churches, opened and closed around us. Smoke swirled in every alley. A warehouse had caught fire, its flames licking up into the sky, spreading with a hungry, terrible speed. Shouts came from all sides. Our captains tried to keep order, to direct men toward key places, the central square, the main church, the prince's hall. But a battle inside a living city has a mind of its own. Small groups broke off, chasing defenders, kicking doors open, dragging people out. Some plundered, some killed, others just stared lost. The city bells, which had been constant, changed their tune. Some were silenced as their towers burned. Others rang on and on, mad hands dragging the clappers back and forth as if desperate to make a god listen. I alternated between horse and foot, between ordered commands and the chaos at every corner. At one point, we found ourselves in a small square. Bodies lay in huddled knots around a well, defenders in armor, townsfolk in plain wool. A horse, one of ours, kicked its last nearby, steam rising from its torn belly. "Move on," our captain yelled. "Forward. Don't get stuck in this mire." We pushed on, boots crunching on broken tiles and pottery. Somewhere behind me, I heard my brother call my name. I turned just in time to see a burning roof crack and fall inward. The wall below it buckled. The street became a trap. Flaming timbers collapsed toward the men beneath them. My brother was among them. Time slowed. He looked up, eyes widening, one hand raised as if to ward off the burning house. I was too far to reach him, too close to look away. The roof caved, sending down a cascade of beams and a wave of sparks. Men shouted, scrambled. Someone vanished under a falling beam with a sound like an eggshell cracking. By some perverse fate, a timber struck my brother's shoulder, not his skull, spinning him toward the edge of the collapse. He slid in a rain of dust and embers, his legs hanging over the new pile of wreckage. I lunged, my fingers catching the cloth of his coat. For a moment, his weight pulled me forward, toward the glowing, burning wood. The heat was a slap on my face. My arms felt like they might pull from their sockets. I hauled backward with a roar I didn't recognize as my own. He slid onto the broken street, coughing, half choking on dust. We rolled clear as flames leapt closer. He lay on his back, staring at the smoke-filled sky. I grabbed his shoulders. "Are you hurt?" I shouted. He coughed, then laughed. A ragged, wild sound. I thought I was going to be buried in this foreign city like a dog. "Not today," I said, though my own legs trembled. In that moment, I would have shattered his bones myself, rather than let the house bury him. Around us, the city burned on, fire leaping from roof to roof, a living thing devouring whatever it touched. We reached the main square as day bled into a smoky dusk. In front of the largest church, our men clustered. The church's gilded domes, now streaked with soot, reflected the fire's glow. Our commanders had pushed here with purpose. Break the city's spirit, they said, and the rest would crumble. The final resistance stiffened there. The Rus prince and his remaining warriors stood on the church steps, swords and axes in hand. Their faces were gray with fatigue and ash, but their eyes were hard. Behind them, priests clutched icons. We formed ranks opposite them. For a heartbeat, a strange quiet fell beneath the roar of the fires. Snowflakes began to drift down from the blackened sky, hissing on hot stone. Ash and snow mingled in the air. Then the spell broke. The last fight was short and brutal. They were brave. I will never deny them that. They charged down the steps and crashed into our front ranks. For a few breaths, the world shrank to the width of my sword block. Strike, step, twist. Then their line buckled, bent, and broke. When it was done, the church doors were forced. Men poured inside, seeking treasure, hacking at wooden images, staring at painted saints with a strange unease. I did not enter. I stood in the square, watching snow and ash fall together. Bodies lay scattered across the cobbles, their blood a dark stain in the poor light. The air was thick with the stink of smoke, sweat, and something else, a sharp, metallic tang. By the time night fully fell, Kiev was no longer a city. It was a wound. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing for more tales from the pages of history. The roofs had sagged or collapsed entirely. Whole streets were blocked by the charred carcasses of houses. The glow of many fires painted the low clouds an ugly orange, like bruised flesh. Dogs and rats already prowled at the edges of piles of bodies. The bells had gone silent, their tongues stilled. We made camp outside the walls again that night. Not because we feared the city, there was nothing left in it to threaten us, but because the smoke and stench inside were too thick even for men used to hardship. From the slopes where we pitched our tents, we could see the glow of the burning city like a great smoldering coal. Sleep came poorly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the wave of fire rolling through the streets, the collapsing house, my brother's coat under my fingers, the Rus man with the arrow in his throat, the prince's last charge. At some point in the long night, my brother, who lay beside me wrapped in his cloak, whispered, "We did as we were ordered. The Khan demanded this. The princes willed it. The city resisted. This is the way of war." "Yes," I said. The word felt heavy on my tongue. Inside, something had been shaken loose. Dawn crawled reluctantly over the horizon, its pale light smearing the smoke into a dirty veil. When the sun finally broke through, it revealed the full devastation. From the hill, Kiev looked like a carcass picked over by crows. The neat rows of houses were gone. In their place lay a twisted mass of blackened timbers. The churches still stood, some of them, their domes blistered and scarred, but their surroundings had been scraped bare. The streets were rivers of ash and soot. Bodies lay everywhere in doorways, in courtyards, half buried in fallen beams. We rode down into that ruin in small groups, picking our way carefully. Every step brought some new horror. Here, a family lay together under a fallen beam, the parents' arms still wrapped around the smaller forms of their children. There, a man knelt lifeless beside a well, his hands frozen around the rope, as if he had tried to draw water, even as the fire closed in. A dog pawed at a pile of charred wood, whining, until it uncovered the blackened form of someone it had loved. Then it threw back its head and howled, a thin, terrible sound among so many silences. We moved like ghosts through someone else's life. In the ruins, I found a broken bit of carved stone, a fragment of what had once been a cross. The figure upon it was cracked, the face half melted by heat. I turned it over in my hand. For a long time, I did not know whether I wanted to toss it aside into the rubble and forget it, or keep it. In the end, I slid it into my belt, not as a trophy, but as a weight, something I could not quite relinquish. The days that followed were a blur of work and exhaustion. We gathered loot under the strict eyes of our commanders. We sorted through what could be taken and what must be burned. We put the wounded ours and those we thought might serve us under crude tents, their groans a constant undertone. We burned many of the dead in piles, the smell of smoke and roasted flesh and wet ash sinking into everything. At night, when the fires died down, the memories surged back. Over and over, I saw my brother slipping toward the flames and my hand closing on his coat. Over and over, I saw the faces of men I had killed. Over and over, I heard the bells ringing their frantic prayer to a god who had not answered. One of our shamans told us, "All cities fall. All princes die. This is the way of the world. The great eternal sky cares nothing for the shape of man-made stone. It cares only that the horse runs and the grass grows, and men fulfill their fate." His words, meant to reassure, scraped at my heart. The world I had believed in the world, where battle was a clear thing, had shifted under my feet in the burning of Kiev. In its place was a harsher truth, that everything men built clung only lightly to the skin of this restless earth, and any day, fire or sword could wipe it clean. Word came that other cities had fallen, were burning or would burn. Kiev, which had seemed to its people like the heart of the world, was just one wound among many. And still, life persisted. Slowly, as seasons turned, other towns rose from the ashes. Markets reopened under the shadow of half-ruined walls. The people of these lands rebuilt on charred foundations, their children learning to play in streets that had once run with blood. I returned, in time, to the life of the steppe. It was the only life I truly knew. Years passed. The first time I rode alone across a wide, empty stretch of grass, with no smoke on the horizon and no walls ahead, my legs trembled. The wind in my ears sounded, for a moment, like the roaring of fire between wooden houses. But as the sun climbed, and the familiar rhythm of my horse's gait settled into my bones, something inside me eased, just a little. War was terrible, yes, but it was also what we were shaped for. It had not risen out of pure malice. It had risen from hunger for land, for tribute, for glory. It had simply moved where our princes pointed it. My brother grew into a seasoned warrior. He took a wife and sired sons who would one day hold bows and ask their own questions. Once, when his eldest boy was old enough to ride a pony, he asked me, "Uncle, Why do men build cities if they can be broken and burned? Why not live only in tents, where no walls can trap you? I thought for a long time. We live where we live, I said slowly, because that is where we were born. Some men love stone the way we love sky. For them, walls are security. For us, they are cages. The same fire that can destroy a city can also keep a child warm. We build, and sometimes the world, or other men, sweep it all away. But while we live, we ride, we hunt, we share what we take. Maybe that is all we can do. On some mound in the west, not far from where Kiev's burnt bones lie buried, there stands, I am told, a wooden cross raised by the survivors. On it, someone carved words in their tongue, a warning and a prayer. I have not seen it, but in my mind, I set it beside our cairnstones on the step their grief and ours stacked together. Now I am an old man. My hands are knotted. My back is bent. When I sit outside my tent, I see a camp that looks much like the one of my youth. Travelers come and go. They remark on the freedom of our life, the wide sky. They envy our lack of walls. They praise our stamina, our horses, our archery. They do not see the ghosts, but I do. In the shape of a distant hill, I see the rise from which I first looked down on Kiev. In the glow of our night fires, I see the orange glare of houses burning. In every child's laugh, I hear, faintly, the echo of a mother's scream. A holy man, taken long ago from a captured town, once said to me, "All things in this world are like smoke from a fire rising, curling, vanishing. Cities, tents, men, princes. Only the sky endures." At the time, his words angered me. But as the years carved their marks into me, I came to understand. The tents we raise, the walls others build, the families we form, all are as fragile as frost on morning grass. Yet that fragility does not make them meaningless. It makes them more precious. We cannot command the sky or the winds of war, but we can cherish the brief moments of warmth we find between storms. I tell my story now because I know how easily such days are turned into flat lines in a scribe's book. Someday, young warriors will listen to our tales with bright eyes, as if we speak of battles against monsters. So I speak. I speak of the open steppe, of the first sight of Kiev, of walls cracked, of the flood of men and fire pouring through. I speak of streets turned to rivers of smoke, and of what came after. The rebuilding, the laughter that slowly returned around new fires, the courage it takes to get up, knowing how quickly all of it can be taken. If long after I am gone, some youth wonders why old stories of Kiev's burning are told with such weight, let him hear this: the walls that guard you can burn. The princes you trust can fall. The enemies you despise are men whose children will cry if they do not return. Trust in memory, and in the stories of those who came before, even when they hurt to hear. Tonight, the sky above our camp is painted with faint colors as the sun sinks. Horses stand hipshot. Fires glow. Children shout, calling their fathers' names. Life continues, as it must. To anyone else, this is a simple, peaceful scene. To me, it is layered with other days, other fires, other cries. I bow my head toward the west, where I know Kiev's rebuilt walls stand over deep foundations of ash, and I whisper a final, private prayer. May those we burned find rest. May their children and ours learn some wisdom from the smoke that once rose together into the same indifferent sky. And may we, who still breathe, never forget how quickly the hand that feeds us can also drive us into the flames. As long as I live, I will remember. And while I remember, the steppe will never be only beautiful. It will also be honest, a place where life and death, terror and peace, conqueror and conquered, ride side by side, like two horses running under the same endless sky. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, consider subscribing for more tales from history.